Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of the top new fantasy that I picked up in the first quarter of 2023. This list is actually kind of a bizarre mix of different subgenres of fantasy, which actually really excites me because hopefully that means that one of my favorites will be something that you're interested in as well, and hearing about it maybe will put it on your radar if you haven't heard me talk about it just yet. In order for books to qualify for this list, they had to have been released within these first 3 months. And also, if you're interested in seeing some of my favorite books that I picked up this quarter that aren't necessarily new releases, I will have my favorite books of the quarter linked in the description bar down below. That way you can see some other things that maybe aren't brand new. Jumping into it though, this should come as no surprise, as when I individually reviewed this book, I listed it as a new favorite, and that would be Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. This book had me gripped from page one. It is quite short, but I don't think the author has a wasted moment. In a lot of fantasy that is very, very long, for example, Stormlight Archive, a lot of people will say some similar things about Robert Jordan or Sarah J. Maas's books. They'll talk about how there seems to be a point when an author gets to be a little bit more successful, and it's for sure that their books are going to sell. If they're putting out new releases, people are going to pick them up. That when that occurs, when that popularity gets to such a high point, that it almost seems like we don't spend as much time editing down and really refining a book so that it's sharp and concise. It feels like maybe every now and then there's some pieces that could have been edited out, but we just want to get this book out to the public as soon as possible. We know it's going to sell. This is a debut. It does not have that luxury, and it feels like Hannah Kaner and her editor, everybody involved with this book, made sure there was not a single wasted moment, because it is quite short. It's not a standalone. It's the first in a series, and it actually feels quite epic, and I was so impressed that it managed to capture that within such a small amount of time. The setup for this story is that we follow a woman who is known as a Vega, or a god killer in this world. There are lesser gods, there are very powerful gods, and then everything in between. Gods' powers are derived from the worship of humans, and gods have various different kinds of powers. Some of the older gods are very, very powerful and are therefore a lot harder to eliminate if you are at odds with them. And that is true for all of mankind versus the gods. And when I say all of mankind, I mean human beings have gone to war with the gods. And the history of that and all of the details you will get throughout the story. But where you are in present day is you are looking at a setting where the current person in power makes sure that people can have this profession of Vega because they were responsible for the war against the gods. They did not like the way that the gods were manipulating human beings. They didn't like the way that the gods were destroying human beings, entire cities or towns at times. And even though there were some gods that were innocent in all of this, this particular ruler just didn't feel like this was a risk they could take by having gods still exist. And so, cue the Vegas, whose jobs it is to eliminate remaining gods. And the way in which they do this is the shrines that are dedicated to the gods is sort of like the thing that anchors them. So if you can destroy the shrine, you will often destroy the influence that that god has, or you at least dampen their power. It becomes much more difficult the older and more powerful the gods are. Sometimes it's hard to even know where these shrines exist, but that does not stop Vegas from trying to do their job. The bizarre thing that ends up happening is that there is a young girl who has a god bonded to her as if she herself is a shrine. But this should not ever occur. This shouldn't happen. And so this young girl actually seeks out of Vega, not to destroy this god because she does have a very close relationship with it, but rather because she wants to ensure that they can separate their bond in a way that will not result in one of them dying. Currently, if they separate from each other and they go even a little bit of a distance away, they start to feel a great deal of pain to a point where they likely will die if they go too far apart from each other. And they're desperate to live their own lives, and thus this relationship forms between this young girl and this god killer. And it reminded me so much of Geralt and Ciri. The Vega is very rough around the edges. The girl is somebody who was rather pampered and is very clueless about the outside world. However, she does have a lot of gusto and she's got a lot of fierceness to her. And then there is one other individual who joins their party, and he is somebody who fought in the previous wars, but he's left that life behind. You do uncover more about these characters and their pasts and the lore within the world as you go in the story, but truly, I really feel like I should be holding up a book that's at least 500 pages with everything that I'm describing, but I'm really only scratching the surface when it comes to what you get with this world, with this book. It is action-packed, fast-paced, while still having great character building moments and character relationship moments. I really, really enjoyed it. I do want to add, it's adult fantasy, and it's very much adult fantasy. So just a heads up, I know for some people they like having that information ahead of time. But switching gears very much, the next book that I greatly enjoyed, I had such a good time with this one. I thought it was charming and a little aggravating at times, but in an endearing way, and that would be an Encyclopedia of Fairies, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. The setup for this one is it's somewhat historical fiction, and you're following a woman who is seeking more knowledge about the Fae. It is not your typical Fae story that we've been seeing a lot as of late, where it is very sexy. It's really, truly, this woman is seeking out the trickster kinds of Fae, the rather alarming and frightening kinds of Fae, the sorts that you hear about in folklore. And it does have that more historical fiction feel to it, which I really liked. So you see her set out to the Nordic countries to try and look into a specific kind of Fae. She goes to this very, very small rural town, village. Everybody is somewhat wary of her initially, and she realizes she's going to have to break out of her very anxious, nervous, introverted self in order to get some information about the Fae from the locals. So she's having to push herself in that way a lot. She's trying to do this research as best she can. And then one of her work colleagues comes into the picture and decides he's going to assist her with this work. She considers this work colleague to be a very close friend. She respects them for their knowledge, but she also finds them very, very frustrating because everything just seems to come so easily to them. And they also seem to have a large amount of knowledge that doesn't seem to be a result of their work ethic. So she's not really sure how they know so much, and she has some suspicions about this person that you dissect as you go through the story. I really liked the difference between these characters, where she is more studious and introverted. He is very extroverted and carefree and almost flippant. And when I say that this book is somewhat aggravating but endearing, I'm kind of specifically talking about him. The book is written in a way where it's almost journal entry format throughout a lot of the story, and that just added to the more academic feel. I had so much fun with this one. I liked seeing a Fae story that really felt like it was drawing from that folklore and drawing from an almost eerie horror-like side of Fae. I really, really enjoyed that. But it did have a lot of charm to it. It is the first in a series, but if you are the kind of person that tries to avoid picking up the beginning of a story when the additional books are not yet out, I would say you could still pick this one up, because in my head I keep thinking it's a standalone, forgetting that you will see these individuals return to their studies in the next book. I don't know how many books there are going to be, but you really truly can pick it up as if it's a standalone. After that, we have Spy Family. So Volume 9 did come out within this quarter, which is why I'm counting it. And while it is not really fantasy, there is a particular aspect to one of the characters that is fantastical in nature, so I'm including it. I just want to shout about it all the time. I'm looking for every opportunity I can to talk about it. I did do an entire in-depth non-spoiler review for it over on my side channel, so I'll have that linked if you're interested. But this is just the most delightful, fun, cheerful, put you in a good mood story. You follow 3 individuals. We have Anya, Lloyd, and Yor, and they are a very interesting family that joins together very quickly, all for ridiculous reasons. Justifications for why they end up together are very fun to discover, but the root of it is Lloyd Forger, and the fact that his last name is Forger. He's a spy, and he is tasked with finding out more information on an individual that could break their Cold War, that could actually start war between the East and the West of their world. So Lloyd's task is to find out more about this man, but he's kind of a recluse. He really doesn't go out and about very often. It's very hard to get close to him. The only opportunity really that anyone has is to end up meeting him through his son. His son goes to this prestigious school called the Eden School, the Eden College. It is a preparatory school, so you have children from a very young age and through older grades, and Lloyd ends up adopting a young girl to go to the school, hoping she will befriend the man's son, and then that way he can get to know this man and he can report this information back to headquarters. And he needs a wife as well to go along with this. It turns out the woman that he marries, unknown to him, is an assassin. She does not know that he is a spy, and the little girl knows everything because she's a telepath, so she can read their minds. And it is so absolutely ridiculous, but it is so fun. I've said a number of times that this kind of feels like satire of manga, satire of anime. A lot of the tropes that we've seen in so many, you'll definitely see that in some of the sports games that occur in this, but also I think it's satire of the spy genre. But when I say satire, I don't mean that it's making fun of it as if those things aren't worthy of picking up or that they are less than, but rather it's almost like it's giving its nod of appreciation to all those things while poking fun at it at the same time. If you watch the anime, I've mentioned that even the music that you will hear in the anime, it sounds so much like spy music. It's perfect. I love it so much. It's truly joyful and it makes me laugh constantly. I can't recommend Spy Family enough. It will put you in such a good mood. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. After that, we have one that will not necessarily put you in a good mood. I actually, when I did a new releases wrap up recently, talked about both Spy Family and The Crane Husband, which is the next book I'm going to talk about. And I might have had a similar transition where I was saying, oh, Spy Family's so fun. This one's not so fun. This is a retelling of a story that involves, in this instance, the story is looking at domestic abuse, but from the perspective of a child. So the setup is that you have the mother of this family who brings home a new man, but this man is a very tall crane. And nobody really bats an eye at the fact that this man is a crane, even though it's not normal for people to have crane spouses, crane partners, but that part is not looked at as strange. However, you see our main character who is a teenage girl. She has a younger brother as well, and she's doing everything she can to essentially survive this situation. This individual is not directly affecting her physically. They are not affecting her brother necessarily physically, but they have their feelings and their assumptions about what this individual might be doing to their mother. They see the way in which their mother is somewhat trapped in this relationship. They see the way that she craves freedom. There is a lot of discussion about generational trauma in this story as well that I think is very well done. However, it is the metaphor for domestic abuse that is at the forefront in this. I think if you have experience with that, this will capture that probably. For me, it captured it better than anything else I've ever really read. That's not necessarily something I see touched on too often in fantasy, so maybe that doesn't really say a whole lot, but truly, while reading this, it sort of brought me back to a lot of memories from my own childhood. It's not an easy read, but it is, I think, very, very powerful, and if you haven't experienced that sort of situation in your own life, I think this does a great job of really showcasing what that's like, what that does to a child, how it forces them to grow up sooner, the survival mode that you go into. It captures that really well, and that desire to just get out, that desire to just have some form of freedom for yourself at some point in your life. I think The Crane Husband did an amazing job with that. The writing is also beautiful. It's simplistic in some ways, but beautiful. The metaphors are done really well, and there's a lot to dissect and different interpretations that you could have for different things that occur in the story. Very, very good. Highly recommend it. I would say those are probably my top, but I wanted to include sort of two honorable mentions. These are maybe unexpected, but I did really enjoy these, and the more I thought about them, the more I figured, you know what, those are kind of standouts for me. They maybe don't stand out as much as those previous four, but I still quite liked them, and that would be The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, and then also City of Nightmares. I'll go ahead and start with this one. This is probably the most unpopular opinion I have for this quarter, as thus far, I haven't seen too many other people really enjoy this one at the level I have. It is a story where you have somewhat of a modern setting, but something has occurred that has caused the nightmares that people have to literally transform them in real life. So something that happened to our main character's family, her sister when she was having a nightmare one day, turned into a giant spider. And while she was a giant spider, she ended up killing their father. And then she went on a killing spree and killed a few other people before she was ultimately shot down. And this phenomenon that's occurred has created a task force that's job it is to eliminate these nightmarish beings that come into existence. In order to remedy the situation, they have put things in the tap water to ensure that you don't dream when you fall asleep to prevent these sorts of things from happening. Our main character is somebody who she is so afraid because of this horrific traumatic event that occurred in her childhood. So she joins this group that is supposed to help people process when these sorts of things happen. And she's mostly there for the free bed and room that she gets by being a part of this organization. This organization by a lot of people is looked at as a cult. They think that they're kind of weird, and she doesn't see it. She sees it as her salvation, the place that she finally has a safe space to exist within. And she's terrified of the world. She's terrified of these nightmares coming into existence again. There's so much that I found to be very quirky but interesting about the world building. An example is that vampires are something that people fear and thus will dream about them, and they've turned into vampires themselves. However, everybody's individual interpretation of vampires is not the same. So some people, when they turn into vampires, they turn to that classic one, more Dracula-like. And then there are also people that turn into more Twilight-like vampires, and so they have different weaknesses or different attributes, and so the task force has different divisions to deal with specific kinds of vampires, which I thought was really, really interesting. They also find that when people turn into certain kinds of monsters, then there will be this influx of people that are then afraid of that kind of monster. So if they do happen to dream because they didn't drink their water that day or something, then there's probably a higher likelihood that they would become the thing that has been rampaging through the city recently. So the world building I thought was really interesting. That said, there's really no explanation, at least in this first book. Don't know if we're going to get any. There's really no explanation as to why this strange thing has started to occur within society. So if you're looking for answers or for things to make a whole lot of sense, they don't really. And I was fine with that. I was fine with it. It is very quirky. It is very odd. It is kind of morbid in its humor, which I liked and I think was the right way to go. I think if it had taken itself too seriously, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. But the fact that it seems to be very cheeky and it takes everything with a very light air to it made me really, really enjoy it. I thought it was so weird, but so fun. I really liked it. And one other detail is that sometimes the things that people turn into don't harm other people, so you don't have to kill them, but they can't reverse the effects all the time. So sometimes you have people, for example, there's an individual who's part lizard. So that's just how they live now, as part lizard. But they're not harming anyone, so what is the harm in letting them continue to live? So anyway, there's a lot to it that I thought was just quirky and strange and eccentric, but a lot of fun. And then the last one, which is pretty different from that, would be Last Tale of the Flower Bride. This one is very much rooted in fairy tales. It's very much rooted in lore, mythology, all these tales that you get told over and over and over again. And you have two main characters that sort of find each other, I should say, through their obsession with stories. And it is through this connection that they end up marrying one another. But the woman, the wife in the relationship, she has her own dark past, and she asks her husband to never try to open that door, but inevitably he does when they have to go back to her childhood estate because a family member of hers is passing away. This family member seems somewhat like they are not necessarily in their right mind. They start saying things that are rather cryptic and strange, which is of course drawing the husband in, and he wants to learn more. And he is dealing with his own trauma, and he's trying to process some things that happened when he was young. And then his wife, he is discovering she might have taken part in some very disturbing things when she was a child. And so you go back and forth between present day, him learning about his wife, but then also somewhat being afraid of her. And then in the past, you are looking at her perspective when she was young, and you're looking at what happened between her and her best friend. And you're also wondering, where is this best friend? What happened to them? And why did everybody seem to have very odd things to say about these two? At surface level, it seems kind of odd, but I think a lot of it is representing the way in which trauma affects a person. And there are some things that I think are a little obvious as you go throughout the story, and then there's some really big reveals throughout the story that hit pretty hard. I also think this story shows some of the more horrific things that you find in grim fairy tales and other such stories, and it really zeroes in on those things and asks, what would that do to a person if we actually looked at those things? And how might that affect a person's mind and their perception of the world after that? What would they have to do to really persevere through those experiences? It really shines a light on those darker moments in stories while also using the framework of fairy tales throughout as somewhat of a foundation to build on. So I thought it was really well done. The writing is a little purple, which isn't usually my thing, and the story is somewhat abstract, which is also not always my thing, unless it's in a cheeky, weird way like City of Nightmares. But this one, it's more, you're kind of, it's abstract in a, what, is that actually happening? What's going on? Is there magic in this, or is this all in people's heads? It's that sort of abstract. But I ultimately very much really, really liked it. I already was interested in reading more by this author, but I especially want to read more by her after reading that book. But that's it for my top new releases of the first quarter. I really wasn't sure what I was going to be getting with this first quarter because a lot of my really highly anticipated releases, a lot of the sequels that I was wanting to pick up come out later. So it was very much a very new to me, new fantasy for this first quarter, and I was very pleasantly surprised that I have found so many new favorites or ones that I am eager to pick up more by these authors or more within these series. So I would say ultimately it was a rather successful first quarter. I'm letting you all know that next quarter, because I've picked it up already, Engines of Chaos will be on the next video for favorite new releases. Engines of Chaos was such a good sequel, but I will save that for the end of next quarter. Let me know what your favorite books of the quarter have been, whether they be new releases or just books that you picked up. Like I said, I will have my non-new releases in the description bar down below if you'd like to check out that video, as well as purchase links for any of these. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.